Hi guys, my name is Eric and I'm the kids pastor at Christian Life Center in Fort Lauderdale, Florida. Thank you so much for joining us for another Surge Kids ministry training. Now this training is called Avoiding Kids Ministry Tunnel Vision. Now guys, I know that I'm called to be a kids pastor, that I was called by God to do great and mighty things in the lives of children in America. And I really pride myself as being one of the most passionate kids ministry leaders that I know. Now guys, I am super duper passionate, and that's usually a good thing. But sometimes being a passionate kids ministry leader doesn't disqualify me, or maybe even you, from struggles. Or maybe even better described as a dark side to the passion that we have. And one of the dark sides that kids ministry leaders can struggle with is tunnel vision. It's the belief that our ministry is the best ministry, or the most important ministry, or maybe better described as the belief that our ministry, kids ministry, matters the most. Guys, let me tell you a story about when I was much younger in ministry. It was my very first year out of college. Right out of college, I was on staff as a kids pastor, and I will never forget one Monday morning in staff meeting. My senior pastor, he came in and he gave this glowing report about how God had just worked the day before, that Sunday morning in our worship services. And all the other staff members were kind of like on the edge of their seats, and they were waiting for this big announcement. And I kind of felt like I was out of the loop, like I had no clue what was going on. And I was kind of just sitting there, and it felt like everything was moving slow, kind of like the middle of a movie. And as I began to put the pieces together, I knew I was out of the loop. And my pastor explained something that he kind of assumed that everyone knew exactly what he was talking about. And he said that our church had committed over $175,000 in faith promises for our Heart for the House offering. That was the fund that we used to renovate our current church building and even build onto or build in a new, brand new campus. Now, at that time, we were raising money for an indoor basketball court and a cafe and a media suite and more classrooms, but I didn't know that. My pastor, he was just beaming, and he said, "It is the biggest single day in a faith promise that our church has ever had in our history." And the whole staff was just celebrating. But on the inside, I was boiling. I mean, how could it happen that every other person on earth, or at least in that staff meeting, knew about the offering, but I didn't? How did every other ministry know that this was taking place? When was it announced? Who had talked about it? Why didn't someone tell me what was going on? And in that moment, I felt angry and overlooked and even taken, like someone had taken advantage of me, like I was being taken for granted. And I had been working like crazy just to build the kids ministry at that church, and I was seldom in the main worship services. After that staff meeting, I came up to my pastor and I said, "Hey, I'm not sure what's going on. Why didn't somebody tell me that this offering was going to be taken before it was taken? I would have loved to have been a part of it. I could have helped in some way." And I could tell my pastor, he knew I was mad, but for some reason he was gracious to me. And he looked at me and he said, "Eric, I'm not sure why you didn't know about it. We've talked about it on Sundays for the past month or so." And instantly in that moment, I barked back, "Well, I'm not there on Sundays. How could I ever know about something like this? Hey, Pastor, it's a little unfair for those of us who are unable to attend the service on Sunday mornings. Why should we be kept in the dark about a big offering like this? It's not our fault." And then the pastor, in his ever so patient way, he saw the series of questions that I was saying, and he said, "Listen, we had a giant announcement in the bulletin for the past several weeks. Did you read the bulletin?" And I had to answer, "No, I just didn't have time to read it." And he said, "Well, I sent a big letter out to the entire church explaining the opportunity to provide more ministry opportunities for our media and our music and our choir and even our youth ministries. Did you read that letter?" Sadly, I had to answer, "No, I didn't see the letter. I think it was on the counter at home, but I didn't read it." Well, he said, "We talked about it, in the past several staff meetings. Don't you remember those meetings?" And now my voice goes from being angry to just kind of being embarrassed. And I said, "No, I don't remember. Maybe I wasn't paying close enough attention." And it was in that moment that our conversation just stopped. And my anger again it had morphed into kind of embarrassment. And the irony, of course, is that I was furious and I felt left out about something that I had chose to ignore, All of the communication came to me, but I just ignored it. I made this assumption. If it didn't have anything to do with kids ministry, then I didn't need to pay attention to it. I fell into a mistake, a very big mistake that kids ministry leaders make. My mistake was having tunnel vision, and I missed the bigger picture. Every children's ministry pastor and volunteer has to overcome this obstacle of being isolated to some degree from the mainstream of church life. Now, guys, we are passionate about kids and we are excited about our roles, but it's also easy for us to develop a silo mentality. You see, this silo mentality occurs when you're a part of an organization, but you become self-contained, or you become independent from others, or you fail to coordinate vision or philosophy or even practices. It can happen in divisions of companies, and it can definitely happen in churches today, and it even happens in kids ministries. In the months before the conversation with my pastor after the staff meeting, I'd become so radically devoted to the ministry of our children. And there's nothing wrong with that, but I realized, and I saw it in our ministry, that my kids' church became a ministry unto itself, kind of like a church within a church. And the hard part, or the sad part, was I wasn't doing anything to resolve that. I wasn't taking initiatives to find out more about the mainstream of what our church was doing. And in fact, I didn't even take a few minutes to read newsletters or even properly pay attention in staff meetings. I didn't care about what they were doing because I was committed to what we were doing. I was building my own little kingdom, and I resented anyone who didn't contribute to our success. I only paid attention to other pastors and church leaders if their input actually applied directly to my kids' ministry. And guys, this is a dangerous place, and there's many dangers of this tunnel vision. So I want to share with you today some of the dangers and some of the pitfalls that we can fall into, maybe even some of the warning signs that we've developed this tunnel vision. If we don't know the symptoms, we may even suffer severe consequences. Here are some dangers that I think kids pastors, kids leaders, and kids volunteers can suffer from. Number one, we develop a territorial spirit. You see, when operating in a silo mentality, we develop an us against them mentality. We think, well, I do kids ministry, let them worry about all the other ministry. Besides, we do what really counts. Just ask George Barna. Now, I've had this attitude before, and I've said things like kids ministry is the most important ministry, but this attitude, it's good to have passion, but it can also be poisonous. And if you're not careful, it can cause division, not just within the kids ministry, but within the church. Now, it's a wonderful thing to believe what we do. It's a wonderful thing to believe that it really matters. And I do believe that. I know that kids ministry is not babysitting, but it's ministry. It's literally heaven or hell for these kids, and we get to stand in the gap. It's terrific to see the work of God on how He's able to change the lives of children. And it's just exhilarating to have a deep sense that God has equipped us for a particular role in ministry. But the sheer joy of serving God, it can drift into arrogance, and it can even ruin the individual and everything that we touch. Let me tell you another story. When I was at my first church, the same church I was at the beginning of the story, it was called Living Water Fellowship in Kissimmee, Florida. And I remember I got a call on Saturday night from our worship pastor. His name is Pastor Pucci. And at the time, he was the worship pastor. The drummer for the regular worship service was sick. And he asked if he could take my drummer from our kids' worship team. And I had already practiced special music, I'd already planned it, we'd already had a rehearsal, and when I was on the phone, I was angry that the pastor would even ask. I said, obviously, no one cares enough about kids ministry, we always get the leftovers. In that moment when I was on the phone, I failed to grasp that Sunday morning, that the worship experience for the adults is central to the calling and strategy of the church. I had heard my senior pastor say this numerous times, that Sunday morning in the sanctuary pays the bills, and if it's not excellent, everything suffers. But for some reason, I gradually began to see every other ministry and event as competition to kids ministry. Now, when Pastor Pucci called me, he wasn't being demanding, he wasn't being rude, he simply just made a request. And I'd become so fiercely territorial that I was trying to make my drummer, I was trying to say, no, he's mine, you can't have him. Guys, don't get territorial. No one wins. Number 2, the dangers of a tunnel vision mentality. We can develop a poor me mentality. Now, when we don't feel appreciated, it's a big step from being territorial to being consumed with self-pity. When we feel like second-class ministers, we feel persecuted, and we feel like every perceived slight, it hurts like a blow from an axe. In fact, one of the signs that we've crossed the line is when we become overly upset over a perceived injustice. You see, a healthy person would ask questions to clarify things, but a fragile, furious person takes offense when no offense has even occurred. Number 3, I infect the rest of my team. You see, in our ministry at the time, I was the model. I was the example. I was the one that other people would look for leadership. And when they looked at me, what did they see? Guys, when I was young in ministry and when I shared the story at the beginning, I was a person who often complained. I would say things like, nobody sees how important kids ministry is. And it was really, really fast, but others began to copy my words and actions. And before I knew it, I created this kids ministry culture of resentment. It wasn't pretty. At one point, I had realized that several of our kids ministry volunteers were even going home after they served with us in the kids ministry instead of going to the adult worship service. We had 3 services at the time, so lots of people would serve in kids and then go to service, but people were just leaving. And when I asked them about it, it was kind of like looking in the mirror. They looked at me and they said, Eric, we're doing what really counts. The regular worship service, it's just so boring compared to what we're doing. There's just no need for us to go over there. They picked up on my negative attitude like a bad cold. Guys, this attitude, this tunnel vision is contagious. Number 4, I fail to support and may even compete with the senior pastor's vision. Now, guys, you can't communicate what you don't understand. If you aren't connected to the senior pastor's vision, you might end up casting your own vision, which may be different from his. Remember, the only reason you have your job is because your pastor can't be everywhere at the same time. God has called your pastor to lead the church, and your task is to support him, to support the vision for the church, the community, and the future. And hear me when I say this, even a volunteer, we have to do everything in our power to foster a spirit of unity. Number 5, I failed to communicate key information to parents and team members. You see, when we create silos, we don't often value information about other areas of ministry or even the church itself. If a parent or a kids ministry team member needs some information about an event, sometimes we're clueless. In fact, we may gently, or sometimes not so gently, even ridicule someone else for asking about an event that's not central to our kids ministry. That's tunnel vision. You see, sadly, some parents or even other adults would be even afraid to ask the kids pastor or kids ministry volunteers about other events because we have this reputation that we only care about our area. Tunnel vision isn't just an inconvenience. It's an acid that eats away at everything good, everything right, everything noble, everything pure in a leader's heart, in a team's life, and it has a massive ministry impact. So how do we avoid tunnel vision? Guys, it's not enough to just sit back and expect your pastor or other staff members or other volunteers and leaders to make sure that you're connected to the body, connected to the entire scope of the church life. You have to take responsibility. So here are some steps that you can take to make sure that you remain connected to the entire church. Number 1, I want you to read every available piece of information. Make it a weekly practice to read the slides before church. Maybe read the church bulletin or newsletters or emails or articles on the website, anything that tells you what our church is doing. Most churches do a good job of getting information out to their people, including the staff, including the leaders, and including the volunteers, but it's up to you to take a few minutes. And guys, that's all it takes, just a few minutes to sit down and find out what your church is doing. Number 2, ask questions. If you're unsure about an upcoming event or a strategy or any other plan, take initiative to get the correct answer. Now, this is really important. I used to be so petty or maybe even dense about it. I would ask something like, a question that was kind of phrased like, is there anything going on that I haven't asked you about? Don't wait for information to be spoon-fed to you. Go find the proper information in a staff meeting, in a leaders meeting, in a volunteer meeting. Ask your pastor, ask the leaders, is there any information that we are supposed to communicate? Do the volunteers need to know something? Do the parents need to know something? Do the kids need to know something? It's important, and this is very, very key, that in our unity, we are communicating the same thing. Number 3, watch or listen to the Sunday morning service. Now, most churches go live every Sunday with a pastor's sermon each week. If you can't attend the service, most of the time, for me, I can't make it. So I have to make it a priority to listen or even watch the message sometime that week. My feeling is the sooner that I can do that, the better. For me, it's Sunday afternoon, Sunday night, or even Monday at the very latest. When we do this, we keep connected to the senior pastor's heart. We know what the church is doing. We understand the heartbeat of our church. Every week, I watch my senior pastor's message. I watch it on YouTube. It's 30 to 45 minutes of my life, and there's times where I really make it a point that I have to watch it. I want to see the expression on my pastor's face. If he's going to tear up, if he's going to smile, I don't just want to hear the message, but I want to see the conviction. I want to see it on his body language. Now listen, if I'm desperately in a rush that week or maybe I'm driving a lot, at the bare minimum, I'm going to listen to the podcast because I have to stay in tune in one heartbeat with the senior pastor's vision. Number 4, pay attention in staff meetings. Guys, these are key moments of your months and of your weeks. And one of my favorite quotes by one of my kids' ministry heroes, it says this, make what matters matter more. When you're meeting with your teams regularly, that's because it's important. It's not just important to me, but it's important to you. So you have to make sure that that meeting matters. Even if kids ministry isn't directly affected, you still have the power to add value. If there's a meeting full of volunteers and leaders in the church where it's more than just kids ministry, you have a seat at that table and I want you to use it. For most of us, we can add value to other ministries of the church, but if we get so focused on not being able to see the big picture of church, we can get caught up in the tunnel vision of kids ministry, and that's when bad things begin to happen. Number 5, regularly pray for your pastor and other department leaders. In my relationship with other pastors at our church, I want to go way beyond just the idea of collecting raw information and coordinating our schedules together. I've tried to really make it a point and a commitment to each and every single person on our pastoral team. I want to make it a point that I'm asking them questions about what's going on in their personal lives, what's going on in their ministry. And when they do that, for me, this is sometimes tough, but I really try and listen. I really try and internalize what's going on. And when I do that, I'm able to properly pray for them. You see, I've asked them specific questions. I've asked them for specific prayer requests. And then I try to go the extra step to check in on them to see how God is working through those prayers. I've made the choice, and this has made a big difference in my perspective, my attitude, and my relationship with each and every single pastor on the team. They've told me their greatest challenges that they've faced in ministry, and I've also found out their greatest joys, and maybe even times where I got to pray for their family. I've got to see the struggles. It's important that we make a commitment to pray for our church, for our ministry leaders, and for our pastors. I think it doesn't just help them, but it helps you stay connected, and it keeps you from being so tunnel vision focused on kids ministry. Number 6, communicate the pastor's heart and vision. I work with my senior pastor, so when we communicate the message, it has the same heart. When our kids go to church, they don't hear a message that's different from what we've taught them in the adult service. We want them to understand and to embrace Pastor Tom's heart. I believe that it's good for our kids, it's good for our parents, but it's also good for us as volunteers. You see, often I invite key leaders of the church, like pastors and board members and other volunteers from different ministries, to join us so they can see what God is doing in kids ministry. And they love to sit back and watch our services and watch our volunteers serve with the same heart and with the same spirit that truly changes lives. Something our pastor says all the time, that if we guard our unity and we are truly unified in what we say and what we do with the same heart, that out of that unity, a special anointing will flow on our ministries. I work very, very hard to guard that unity. Number 7, work hard to help make sure kids make the transition to youth ministry. Guys, we want to make it a very smooth way for our 5th graders to make the move to middle school ministry. I've even asked our youth pastors to preach in the kids ministry several times in the months before the move. I want our 5th graders to know, to love, and to trust the youth pastors before they officially move up and walk through their doors. To make the transition even more comfortable, a couple from the kids ministry will even go up and speak or lead a game or even preach in a middle school or a high school service. Why? Because we want them to see that we're a family. A family supports one another. They're not dysfunctional. When we lose focus of what God has called us to be, which is an extension of our pastor's heart, it can get ugly. Instead of ignoring our senior pastor and the other ministries of our church, I want our kids ministry to celebrate with them. We have to understand, we're partners, not competitors. This isn't just good for an organizational strategy, it's good for our souls too. Guys, in my story, once my anger had subsided and my relationships had improved, we shared a common vision and we were able to help people in our church and in our community experience the love of Jesus Christ. And that's a beautiful thing. Guys, thank you for joining us for another Surge Kids ministry training. I hope that this training was impactful, and I hope that it challenged someone in this room. Maybe you didn't know that you had tunnel vision. Maybe your passion had gotten so out of control and so out of focus that you weren't fostering that spirit of unity. Let me challenge you today to do everything in your power to protect the unity over our church. Thank you once again for being a kids ministry volunteer. I love you. God loves you. God bless you guys. We'll see you again soon.